Hey, hello. Hey, we got a couple people out there. Y'all learned anything yet? It sounds maybe having a good time. All right, well, I'm Monta. Welcome to my talk, Unlocking Secrets, PulseView, and Side Channel Timing Attacks. Let's see. Oh, the award-winning Monta. Derek, if you're watching remote, that's for you. And I do hardware hacking, and I'm a SANS principal instructor. All right, let's get started. We'll talk about timing attacks and use keypad safe as our example. Right, these are the kind of things you find in hotels. We're talking about small embedded devices, typically that have some kind of simple passcode on them. Now, the way these things work, of course, is that you have buttons that you press to enter this passcode, usually short. And if you enter the right passcode, it opens up and grants you access. They also will have typically some buzzer or little lights on the front. The lights on the front say things like, hey, you just pressed a key. Or sometimes if you press a key, it goes beep, 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 right? Or that you failed, you entered the wrong password, maybe it'll buzz at you or another light will light up. And that's the way those interfaces work. So normally if we were going to try to break something like this, and we had a 4-digit password, we've got this 1, 2, 3, 4. If we've got a 4-digit password, you will have to guess all 4 digits, right? So that's 0, 0, 0, 0 through 9999. 10,000 possible passwords. Right? If you had to brute force and try if you were unlucky and you had to try every one, 10,000 passwords. But if somehow you could magically guess one of those digits at a time and know if it was correct, it would go much, much faster. Because then you're trying to guess the first digit. It takes you 10 guesses at the most, right? And guessing the second digit would take you 10 guesses at the most, and the third digit, 10 guesses at the most, right? So it would take us 40 guesses to guess this password if we could do it 1 digit at a time. And that's way less than 10,000. That's a lot faster. Matter of fact, if we could do, if we're entering this by hand on a safe or something, and we could do 1 every 5 seconds, if we only had to guess 40 different times, we could do that in like 3.5 minutes. If we have to guess all 10,000, that's like 14 hours. That's going to be a slog, right? So the way that we can test 1 digit at a time is through a side channel timing attack. If the device leaks some timing information about how long it takes to verify that passcode, we can effectively guess 1 digit at a time. And the way this might work is like this, which is a really sort of simple, straightforward way to match a passcode. We're going to use string compare, right? Your standard sort of C function, string compare. Oh, a little pointy, okay. And the way you would call it is say, hey, we have an entered password. This is the password that we just typed in. And we have a stored password. And we're going to ask string compare to compare them for us. And the way it does that is it does it 1 character at a time. So if our entered passcode or the stored one, let's start with the stored one up top. Our stored passcode is pass. That was what we would have to type to get in. But we type in part instead. What string compare does is it compares 1 character at a time, and it compares the P in pass to the P in part, and it says, that's good, great. So now it goes on and compares the next character. It compares the A in part, the A in pass to the A in part. They match, that's great. Goes on to the next character. The S in pass does not match the R in part. And string compare is efficient that way. And now it just quits. It says, I don't have to check anything else, right? They don't match. It returns something other than 0. It's done. And because of that efficiency, it leaks timing information. So let's think about this again, sort of a slightly different perspective. So if we're comparing a stored passcode and one we've just entered, if we compare the first character and it doesn't match, we're done. If the first character matches, we have to take the time to check the second character. And if it matches, and only if it matches, we have to go check the third character, and so forth. So if we can get some very precise timing on how long it takes to check our entered passcode, that can tell us where we failed. We can check one digit at a time that way. Now let's go back to some of these simple devices. We said, yeah, you enter the buttons and either they blink a light or they make a little beep, or maybe they do both. That's how you can obtain this timing information, because we're going to look at the difference in time between when we entered the last part of our entered password and when we get the failure light, right? The little blink that says, nope, you didn't make it. And we're going to measure that time very precisely and look for very small differences that said, hey, this time it took it a little longer. That means our first character was right, and so forth. There are a couple of ways that you can interface with that interface. Is if it's LEDs, you could do an optical sensor and sort of stick it on the front. You could do that and not have to do any kind of access manipulation to it at all. If it's one of these sort of standard membrane keyboards, you can kind of peel it up and take one of these mini grip clips and clip it on the LED itself and get a direct signal from it. We're just kind of scraping the front off. Or there might be some ways to get even better access, believe it or not. Let's see. This was the safe at a hotel in Helsinki earlier this year. And when I got there, somebody already kind of halfway ripped the front of it off, right? So if I wanted to, I could just solder to the back of it and get those connections. But anyway, they're a pretty straightforward way to get from the timing from when your last key was pressed until you get a fail light or fail buzzer. So in this example, we're going to use a training device that I built for a class that teaches all kinds of attacks, but it's also vulnerable to side channel timing attack. What it is just a membrane keyboard, a microcontroller that's doing that comparison between the two passcodes. And over here is a servo. It'll raise that flag, the red flag, when it opens. And then beside it is the device that we're going to attach to get our accurate timing. This is a cheap logic analyzer. You can pick these up on your favorite sites for $15 less, if you want to go straight to the source, which we won't talk about, China. Pretty easy to do. By the way, just for practice working, this device emits a log of what just happened. You typed in a passcode and it did or didn't work. And in real life, some devices will do like a serial log and some won't. It just makes it a little easier to follow along here. So our wiring looks like this, where the keypad is connected to the microcontroller. That makes sense. And the servo that opens and closes the door, that's connected. And then this logic analyzer, we have to connect it, well, to 3 pins. You might say 2, but it's really 3. We need to find a ground for it, for reference. And then we need 2 signals. One will be some signal when you press a key. It's probably a little blinky light. Most safes do that. And the other signal is when it's failed. When you enter the key and it goes, bzz, doesn't work, right? And that might be a buzzer or a light. And this one, it's set up to be a buzzer. And we're going to carefully measure those times and look at them. We're going to do that with some free software called PulseView. And PulseView can work with all types of sensing devices, multimeters and these cheap logic analyzers. So that's what we're going to do. What it does is it takes the electrical signal and it displays it and graphs it for us. Here's a graph, and it tries to interpret those signals for us. In this case, we just need timing off of them. But if it was some serial connection, it could do that. We have the 2 signals here. We have D0 and D1. So our D0 is that keyboard fail light, and it's the one at the top. And D1 happens every time we press a key. And if we look at those 2 signals, we see I pressed the key 3 times. For this example, we're going to use a 3-digit passcode, It's the same as a 4-digit passcode, only it's one shorter. I mean, it goes faster for the demo, right? You could do it with any number of characters. So we see the key press happen 3 times, and then the fail light went high. Actually, it started out high because it had failed the time before, but the fail light went high, and we can see that. We set up PulseView to read what we wanted. How you have a limited amount of memory storage. For the sample that I set up, the one I captured, which is a little different than the settings right now, I stored 100 million samples at 12 million samples a second. But I'd really like something right where I need it, because this information can take a while to sort through. And if I have it start to collect time and it can only collect 10 seconds and I got to go over and push the key fast enough, and it's kind of awkward. So I'd like it to automatically start keeping time. And the way we do that is with something called a trigger. So here we've set up D0, that's the sort of bottom yellow arrow, as the trigger. And it says, only start recording when D0 goes high, when we see the fail light. Because that's the time we're interested in, right? So don't worry about overrun the buffer before. We just want this little section when D0 goes high. There is a little bit of trouble with that, though. So here's your pre-trigger warning. We're talking about triggers, but let's talk about pre-triggers too. Because if I set up that trigger on D0, look at this bottom graph down here. When that D0 triggers, it's actually after D1. That's the last button press. And we need to measure the time between the button press and D0. So we really want it to trigger before D0. We want it to trigger before then. We don't want to trigger every time we press D1, because I got to press D1 multiple times. So we want to magically trigger right before D1 happens. Right? It's magic, you know. It's magnets. How do they work? What we really do is we set a pre-trigger, and this pre-trigger starts timing before this random signal comes. How does it know when to start timing before the random signal comes? It's actually recording all the time. It's got a buffer that's overrun. And then when you press that, it stores the time. Like some video cameras will do that. Like you're holding it up and you start taking video, and it'll start 5 seconds before then because it's actually running and buffering the whole time. So it's going to grab that snapshot, keep that buffer, and show us just a few seconds, a few microseconds before D1 gets pressed. And that lets us zoom in on the exact time that we need. This is the way we do that pre-trigger setup. I just said 50% of the buffer, move this D1 signal sort of to the middle. That way I can see to the left, in your case left, I can see to the left of it and see when that last button was pressed. And it lets me zoom in right on what is going on. With only a few samples, I'm only taking 500 samples here, but I'm getting it at just the right time because I do it when D0 goes high. All right, that's pre-trigger setup. All right, so now we've got the methodology. We know if we can figure out 1 digit at a time, we can do this much faster. We know how to do that. We're going to time the time between the last button was pressed, and it tells us failure, because that's going to change a little bit depending on how many characters it has to match. So now what we do is we start running through codes. And this is the first set of codes we are going to enter to try to break the safe. 1111, 2222, 3333. We're actually just looking for the first digit. So the second 2 don't matter. But if you're in a hurry, it's just easier to press, 3 at a time. Or if you're doing 4 digits, 4 at a time. It's all the same thing. So we're gonna press each cent there and look for what? One that's longer. All right, so I set up the pre-trigger. I typed in 3 1s here. I see that pre-trigger in the middle. I see left of that, D1 went high, about 10 microseconds early. Well, I need to know a little more precisely than that. So PulseView also has these cursors that you can set up, the little blue tags up there. And you can they will snap to those edges, but you sort of drag them and snap them. And here it gives us exactly 11.08 microseconds. I'm going to round it to 11.1. Okay. So somebody out here, you remember 11.1 for me? All right, 11.1. We don't really know if one is correct or not yet, but we do have a time. I typed 2222. Again, between the last button press and the fill, it's 11.1. Is that the same as the first one? Same as the first one. All right, so now that tells me something. I can't have like two right answers, all right? So since they're both the same, those both must be wrong. I know the timing of wrong. So I start going through again, 333, 333, 11.6. Is that the same time? Thank you very much. You are a winner. Hang on, I'm going to pay you for that one because, you know, I appreciate good help along the way.
You're all right.
Yeah. Okay, so our timing is longer. That means the first one matched and it has to check the second one. So now I know the first digit. The first digit is 3. Fantastic. I actually did a few more when I was doing this. I set up this little spreadsheet and, you know, after the third one, we can see that I've got it. But I did a few more just to make sure. And we do see like a little bit of jitter, like a 1 microsecond jitter. But the 333 was much longer. So, and you could check all of them if you wanted to, but generally you can see those pretty quickly. Same thing, slightly different. Now I need to know the second digit. We know the first digit is a 3 all the way through. So we're going to try 311, 322. Doesn't really matter the third digit. We're just looking for the second. It's just easy to hit the same button, so we'll do that. So here we go. 311. We hit that and we get 11.6. Oh, here's a hard question for you. Is that the same as our last time? Yeah, so it's the same as the fail. Basically, this tells us that this is the same as our last guess. And since we don't have 2 different second digits, we know that this one's wrong and the first one was wrong. So, but this is our new baseline, 11.6 microseconds. So 311, not the password, 11.6, 322, 12.1. We've got another winner, right? We're 2 digits in and I don't know, 4 or 5, 3, 4 guesses. I can't count while I'm up here. And once again, I did a few of these just to make sure, ran through a few more, but that's pretty much what it says, was that the 2 is the second digit. The other ones are not as good. Now for their third digit, or this will be your final digit if you're doing 4 or 5 or 6 or 10, we don't have to time this one. Why? Because if we get it right, AirSafe opens. Beautiful. So we start typing 321, no, 322, no, 323, no, 324, no, 325, 325, bingo, right? Safe opens, money falls from the heavens, your girlfriend loves you. So we've got the answer, right? All right, so now if you're trying to figure out, okay, we sort of understand that it leaks some information. That's concerning. It makes it happen much faster than we expected. What can we do about that? We'll talk just briefly about some of the things that you might do. The first thing that tends to come to mind is, well, we could just add a delay, right, between when somebody hits the last button and you add some delay. That's sort of the intuitive thing to do, but it doesn't help. Because if you add 5 seconds in there, it's still 5 seconds plus this extra 5 milliseconds that we're looking for, or 5 microseconds that we're looking for, right? We can still measure that. So adding a constant to it just doesn't do anything. Adding a random time delay, that can be useful. That can make it a little harder to figure it out. If it's some sort of automated system, sometimes maybe an online or web system or more powerful system, if I can do a bunch of guesses against it, I can still figure it out. But adding a random time delay does make it harder. But if you're doing something like, you know, looking for crypto keys or something, and you get a lot of guesses. That timing can depend upon the number of ones in one of the multipliers, depending on the way the architecture works. So a random time can help, but that base problem is still there. Account lockouts, that can be a useful strategy. Like after 10 guesses, you lock them out, right? And somebody has to reset it. So that can be useful. Now, the basic flaw is still there, but that lockout can help. In our case, we were a bit lucky. We actually got it in 10 guesses. But you're not always guaranteed to do that. If you've got 4 characters, that's like 25% of the time would you get it in 10 guesses. So count lockout would be good. The other thing that you could do is get a compare function that takes a constant amount of time. That's sort of it's a reasonable thing to do in this case. When we start thinking about efficiency, that's awful. That means all of our compares take as long as possible, the longest one. But from this side channel timing attack, that means that, it's not leaking time. One of the things to watch out for there is to actually create that yourself is trickier than you may think. We have to be correct to basically 1 clock cycle. So you've got to make sure your routine takes up time to exactly the same number of clock cycles, whether it's true or false. So I'd look for an existing library to do that. Right, because it's going to compare, and then maybe just wait till it hits the constant time. Right, so that would defend your side channel timing attack. We will wait to talk about side channel power attacks until next time. That might be vulnerable to that. All right, so that's it. There are other attacks that you can do on these devices. If you follow me, I'll be doing other talks in other locations and doing other demos and so forth. So you could read the password directly out of EEPROM. That's where they typically store these. We can write the password to EEPROM to change it. Vendors sometimes put passwords in the firmware. You pull that off and look for it. If the password is stored in an external EEPROM, you can sniff it off the bus. Various other items. So in any case, here is my contact information. And thank you very much.
Sorry that I butchered your name, by the way.
No worries. It's Monta. You can either spell it or you can say it, but you can't do both because it doesn't match up.
Not.
Yeah.
Actually, the only recurring question that I have is, are you on the Discord server? Which is kind of a weird question, but apparently it's very popular.
Wow, that's a very good question. No.
No. Okay.
Look, I'm a little ADHD. I got a lot of projects working, and I got about 15 different ways to contact me, and adding one more overflows my internal buffer.
It's kind of mind-blowing. This is not a question, just a remark for me, that you can do all these attacks with very cheap hardware, in the sense that I thought it was going to be a lot more complex. Because I've never done this type of thing before myself, so it's quite interesting to see you explain it.
Yeah, so technically you want something that will have a sample rate of, let's say, twice the clock speed. Nyquist comes into play here. In practice, this was a 16 megahertz microcontroller, small, cheap sort of device. I was able to do this really well, just sampling at 12 megahertz. Theoretically, these cheap analyzers go up to 24 megahertz. I find them a little unreliable, faster than 12. I don't quite know why. If somebody knows, send me and let me know. But so I run them at 12, but that's enough resolution for this device. But if you were trying it against something faster, you'd buy a more expensive timing device.
A question that I had, again, quite strange, is...
I hope it's an easy one. Is it an easy one?
Can we buy the training device somewhere?
This training device?
Yes.
Check with me online. Like I said, I'll be giving talks about them and probably doing some of these trainings, or maybe talk to me. We'll figure it out.
And then there's one question. Does the power delivery mechanism of the safe change the voltmeter readout?
I mean, do we have 2 minutes?
We do. Yeah.
Okay, all right. That's a good question that I sort of alluded to, which is another hardware hacking attack, right? It comes across the same sorts of ideas. Remember I said we could write perhaps a compare statement that took the same amount of time, no matter what two strings it got. Like you would compare, and then when you get done comparing, you're going to wait until you get to your 3 milliseconds or whatever your limit is going to be. The problem with that is that the instructions that you're running during the compare probably take a different amount of power, probably more power than the instructions you do when you're just doing no ops till you get to 5 or 3 milliseconds. Right? So if you're also monitoring power on the device, that can be another way to leak this information, right? So there are a lot of side channel attacks, timing and power and RF and lots of fun and games, and I'd like to talk about those. Yeah, you got time for, we got a hand in the back? Yeah, hardware crypto passkey generators. You should probably follow like Joe Brand and yeah. And there's currently a one going around where there's a lock on a USB device that's hard encrypted. I think just sort of following that along, I'm guessing that they did a way to get infinite number of guesses against it without it timing out. And there's some tricks to do that that hopefully I'll cover in some other talks. So not directly, same techniques, but not directly on those devices.
Any other questions here in person? All right. Thank you so much for your
All right. Thank you all.